I'm joined now by a very special guest all the way across the pond in the Netherlands, Gerard Bos, whose story you may be familiar with, one of the most famous St. Louis Blues fans in the world. Gerard, we'll start off with the first obvious question. How does somebody in the Netherlands become a fan of the St. Louis Blues?
First of all, thanks for having me and hello to everybody. I guess it's an amazing story and it's because of the computer game you probably all know. It's NHL 94, a classic computer game. That's how it started with the St. Louis Blues, because we in the Netherlands don't know much about hockey, certainly not as young kids in that time. We had to pick a team. I just picked the team with the nicest logo, and that, in my opinion, were the St. Louis Blues. And then I started to follow them in real life.
You're right, the game NHL 94, for whatever reason, has endured even more so as more and more games have been released. How did you transition from playing the video game to watching games? And were you primarily watching on delay? Obviously, time difference there. The games would be usually in the middle of the night for you.
That's right, because it's most of the time 7 p.m. in St. Louis, and that means it's at 2 a.m. here. The couple of afternoon games over there in North America, I cherish those because then it's a normal time here. It started out, of course, with the computer game in the 90s, and then internet came. Then you could follow them by reading about the Blues, and then things like web streaming came along, and then you could actually watch games, how they really play. Then, of course, social media came along, stuff like Twitter, and then you can interact with real hockey fans from all parts of the world. Then I was on a trip through the USA 10 years ago, and I thought I should make a stopover in St. Louis and try to get to know some people. And then I got to know some people, and I stayed in touch ever since. That's how I kept on following the Blues.
And the big story is you end up in St. Louis for the Stanley Cup final. I believe you were at Game 6 and stayed in the city to watch Game 7 with everybody else. How did that come to be?
It's really like a movie story, real feel-good story, as you people in Canada and the US probably would say. Because I always said to the people I know on Twitter through the years, I said, whenever they reach the Cup final, I will be going to St. Louis. Every year I saved some money. Obviously, it didn't happen. This last season, of course, they were at the bottom of the NHL standings in January. So I thought this won't be the year either. So I didn't have any money saved for a trip to St. Louis because I didn't count on St. Louis Blues being in the Cup finals. And then all of a sudden they reached those. Some people on Twitter said, you promised to come here when they would reach the Cup finals, so you better come here now. And I said, oh, I don't have the money for that. And then they said, we're going to start crowdfunding to get you here. And that's how I ended up being in St. Louis, because there was an anonymous donor who donated $1,500 because he liked the story so much. I was in the news in St. Louis, and then there was a family who had recently lost their son to a brain tumor, and he was a passionate Blues fan. They said, we have read and seen your story. Our son would have appreciated you being here, and in his memory, we will donate some money too, and then you can buy a game ticket while you're here, because the prices were, of course, sky high. And that's how I ended up at the game, and then the story got more and more known, and then there was somebody who said, I'll take you to the watch party of Game 5, and then there was a businessman who said, I'm going to take you to Game 6, I'm going to get you a ticket. So the story went crazier every day, just like the Blues' success went crazier. They all of a sudden started winning. While I was there every day, my story got crazier too. So it was like a fairy tale. Very strange in a good way.
Following you through it was really something else. You end up going to a local soccer game, a Cardinals game as well, taking in everything that was in St. Louis.
Yeah, and I always try to stress that I did not ask for anything. Yeah, I asked for a small donation, but I thought people might give $1 or $2, and let's see what happens. But I never asked for tickets, stuff like that. I was on a radio interview, and then I got a message from one of those guys who presented the show. They said there was somebody who heard your story and said he should visit the Cardinals baseball as well. So I'm going to give him a ticket to visit the baseball game. And that's how all those things evolved every day. It was kind of surreal. And that was only my part of the story. I mean, that the Blues kept on winning it was hand in hand with each other.
Tell us a little bit about what hockey culture is like in the Netherlands. You would get into it through playing a video game. Were many of your friends on board as well? What's the response to the NHL in those parts?
Well, we all know it, of course. We're not a big hockey country, but we're not a big country as a whole, of course, with the amount of people who live here, 17 million. We're a soccer country. That's how most people know the Netherlands, of course, and speed skating, and Canada probably as well. That are the main two sports here. There is hockey here, but it's on a level. This is Cape Breton or Cape Breton?
Cape Breton. Many people in Canada say Cape Breton, so you got it right the first time. Well done.
Okay, Cape Breton. Well, I mean, if Cape Breton, if your team would play, for instance, our national team, your team would probably win. That says something about the level of play of hockey here. I mean, it's a good level. It's not like the best of Europe in Sweden and Germany. That's all much higher level.
So, of course, I'm here in Cape Breton. A key player on one of our rivals in Charlottetown a few years ago was Daniel Sprong, who played hockey in the Netherlands until age 12 or so, I believe, and then came over to Canada. Has his story made any waves over there at all as he tries to make his way in the NHL?
Yeah, it certainly did. We all know Daniel Sprong here, and sports fans across the country know his name, but also follow how he is doing. There's, of course, not many NHL players from the Netherlands, and he's kind of a successful one by our standards. His story is very well known here. People always said maybe he is the first Dutch player to win a Stanley Cup, but at least I touched the Stanley Cup earlier than he did, so that's kind of cool. I might be the first Dutchman ever to touch a Stanley Cup.
I highly recommend people look into your story because we can't even really begin to cover everything that you got to do in a short interview. I know they can follow you at Dutch_bluesfan on Twitter. We'll finish off, though, Gerard. Justin Falk comes in just before the season starts. What are the odds your Blues repeat as Cup champions? Tough task.
History is not on the Blues side, with just not how many clubs are successful in repeating the Stanley Cup victory. But, I mean, they have almost the same roster as last year, and with Falk, they have a great extra defensive addition. I know I'm biased, but I would say they have the best defensive corps in the NHL. Maybe if you look at how surprising it was that the Blues won in the first place, maybe it's in their story to repeat it, and that would be as much as a surprise as winning it for the first time.
Well,
who knows?
Fans everywhere will be watching, and fans in Cape Breton, perhaps with a new attachment now that one of our stars, Matthias Laferriere, is drafted by St. Louis. Well, Gerard, great to hear your story. Great to see people catching on to the game everywhere around the world. Thanks for telling us all about it.
Yeah, as of now, of course, we'll follow Cape Breton with more than average interest because of the Blues prospect who's playing there and because of this interview, of course. I'd like to thank you for the coverage, and I wish you all a good season too.
Well, we appreciate that. That is Gerard Bos joining us at the intermission. You're listening to Carstar, Cape Breton Eagles Hockey, 1270 CJCB.